For the first time, we know what was in the document Luis Elizondo sent to the incoming Trump administration. It is called Prioritizing Emerging All-Domain Technologies, and it calls for something that's never existed before: a UAP Czar inside of the White House. This comes as the 2026 National Defense Authorization Act explicitly includes UAP provisions. That is right. UAPs are written directly in the defense bill that funds our military. This week, Ross Coulthart obtained a copy of that memo and sat down with Elizondo to discuss what it means and whether the administration is taking action. As always, I'm here to report the information without bias, and you can decide what to believe. You can find the sources in my detailed articles at ufonews.co, along with in the description box below. Hey ufologers, I'm Cristina Gomez, and welcome to this episode of UFO News Updates. Ross revealed the contents of a memo Luis Elizondo wrote to President Trump, and the document was sent through the Disclosure Foundation shortly after Trump's election victory in 2024. The title alone is worth doing a double take: Prioritizing Emerging All-Domain Technologies. Elizondo is using a new term here, EADT, and that framing is very intentional. That memo doesn't lead with aliens or anomalous phenomena, it leads with national security. According to that document, the EADT includes unmanned aerial systems, identified anomalous phenomena, and certain other advanced systems operating across air, space, and sea domains. That memo states that these technologies are capable of intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and even kinetic strikes. In other words, Elizondo is making the case that drones and UAPs are part of the same problem. We don't know what's in our skies, and that right there is a threat. Here's what Elizondo mentioned on Reality Check.
Everything is unidentified until it becomes identified. And that's true whether it's a Chinese spy balloon or it is a drone, as we saw in the recent New Jersey flap last year, or it is a UAP. And so you can think of this emerging all-domain technology as a large umbrella.
The most significant recommendation in the memo is this: Elizondo calls for a creation of a White House senior advisor, a czar, within the National Security Council. This individual would coordinate the government's response to emerging all-domain technologies. They would formulate policy, and they would conduct domestic and even international outreach. And in all of this, they would have direct access to the president. Elizondo explained his rationale.
And so by creating an individual that sits at the very top that can advise the president, we can actually pin the tail on the donkey. Look, we have a drug czar for this country. We have a terrorism czar for this country. We have all these positions that are put in place simply to kind of cut through the red tape of the bureaucracy and inform the president and inform the administration of emerging threats as they're happening.
The memo also recommends a national intelligence estimate on the EADT, including UAP. It calls for a 25-year mandatory declassification of all UAP information unless the president grants an exemption case by case. And it even recommends accelerating research into advanced propulsion by engaging academic and scientific communities. Elizondo's message is very clear. AARO, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, simply isn't enough. The memo states that although Congress created AARO within the Department of Defense to analyze UAPs and explain them away, the office remains hopelessly stuck in bureaucracy and unable to achieve its mission, according to Elizondo. So has the president acted on this memo? Elizondo was very careful not to speak for the administration. He confirmed the memo was sent, but could not confirm whether President Trump has read it personally. However, he did offer some insight.
I'm very confident and very relieved that at least certain individuals whom I know are working on this topic are indeed taking it very seriously and basically pulling the thread to see where it leads. Now, at the end of the day, time will tell what those results will be. But no, I'm very grateful and heartened to see some of the efforts that I see behind closed doors.
He said there are pockets within the FBI and the Director of National Intelligence that are taking the topic very seriously. He described their approach as measured and said they are asking the right questions. But he also issued a warning.
time isn't really on our side. I think we have to have some patience and give the administration some time, but I don't think we have a whole lot of time. I think we really have to do a much better job of trying to figure out what's going on. And it's a tough nut to crack. It's a tough problem.
And remember the NDAA for 2026 that I mentioned a little bit earlier? We need to get into that, so stay with me because we need to talk about the legislation that could force the government's hand. The fight over the NDAA is getting serious, and 2026 might be the turning point. Every year, Congress passes the National Defense Authorization Act, or the NDAA. This is the law that sets the defense budget and policies for the Department of Defense. Over the past 4 years, UAP provisions, keyword provisions, have been steadily added to the NDAA. Let's take a look at that timeline. In 2022, Section 1683 established the office that would become AARO, and it created standardized procedure for collecting and analyzing UAP incidents and required annual reports to Congress up until 2026. We're hitting that threshold right now. And then in 2023, Section 1673 created secure reporting procedures and whistleblower protections. This protected government employees from retaliation if they came forward with UAP information. It also required AARO to conduct a historical record review dating back to 1945. Then in 2024, Sections 1841 through 1843 required the National Archives to create a UAP records collection within 60 days. Section 1687 and 7343 prohibited spending on special access UAP programs unless Congress was briefed. In 2025, that NDAA mandated a Comptroller General review of AARO's implications. But of course, here's the catch. Each year, the stronger transparency provisions have been stripped out before final passage. In 2023, Senator Chuck Schumer and Senator Mike Rounds introduced the UAP Disclosure Act, often called the UAPDA, and this legislation was modeled after the JFK Records Collection Act from 1992. The original bill had 3 major components. First, it would create a UAP records collection at the National Archives. Second, it would establish an independent review board appointed by the president to oversee declassification. And third, it would grant the government eminent domain over recovered technologies of unknown origin held by private contractors. That third provision is very significant. It would have allowed the government to reclaim any exotic materials that defense companies might be holding. The bill passed the Senate with bipartisan support, but when it hit the House, it was absolutely gutted. Congressman Mike Turner, then chair of the House Intelligence Committee, and Mike Rogers, chair of the House Armed Services Committee, led efforts to strip out the key provisions. The Independent Review Board was removed. The eminent domain provision was also removed. The same pattern repeated in 2024. Rounds and Schumer reintroduced the UAPDA, and it was again excluded from the final NDAA. So what about now? The fiscal year 2026 NDAA includes new UAP provisions. Take a listen to these ones. These ones are pretty interesting. Requires briefings on UAP intercepts conducted by NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, and NORTHCOM, the United States Northern Command. The first briefing must include details of any UAP intercepts going back to January 1st, 2004. Section requires that every element of the intelligence community make UAP data available immediately to AARO. Section requires AARO to account for all security classification guides that apply to UAP investigations. When asked whether President Trump is thinking about disclosure, Elizondo was cautiously optimistic.
Yes, there's a tremendous opportunity here for our president to be the first sitting president to say, yes, this is real and this is a problem. But there's also a tremendous amount of risk. Because if it turns out that there is some sort of foreign adversarial involvement behind this, there's some sort of new type of stealth reconnaissance capability, let's say that country X developed or something like that, and we go out on a limb and say that these things are all because of this, and it turns out they're actually because of that, then that's a risk as well, and that can actually be used to discredit you and to hurt your efforts. So the president, all presidents, have to be, and this is why they have so many advisors, they have to weigh the pros and cons of what they say publicly.
But Elizondo also acknowledged the overall complexity. Disclosure is not just a national security conversation. It affects people philosophically, theologically, psychologically, and even sociologically. The question is whether the administration will act on this. The NDAA conference negotiations are expected very soon, and that is when we will learn what UAP provisions survive and whether the Full Disclosure Act even has a chance. But here's my question for you. Do you think we need a dedicated UAP czar in the White House? Would that cut through bureaucracy or just add another layer? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I'm Cristina Gomez, and that is it for today. I will see you again tomorrow at 10 a.m. PST for another UFO news update. Be safe, and remember, keep your eyes on the skies. If you enjoyed today's show, hit that like button. And if you're not subscribed, what are you waiting for? Hit the notification bell as I do daily UFO news and updates. Fresh UAP stories, government disclosures, and breaking developments land here every single day.